Hi everyone and welcome to my channel Karoline Knits. My name is Karoline and I live in Scotland with my partner Ben, but I am originally Danish. On this channel I post sort of traditional knitting podcasts and other sort of knitting related content every once in a while. So thank you so much if you're a returning viewer, and I hope you enjoyed this video if it's your first time. I am hoping to film on a monthly basis going forward. I feel like a month seems to fit quite well with the amount of knitting that I do, because I'm quite a monogamous knitter, so there's not much to show otherwise. So I think that's the plan coming up for 2023. I am also filming on a new phone, and I just don't know if I've managed to get everything just right. If I just adjust you a little bit, it is a surprisingly difficult part. I feel like that's better. I always use my Apple Watch to see what I'm filming. I still film on my iPhone, but I've just upgraded my iPhone and I'm using a new feature which should hopefully make the background a little bit more blurry, which should make for a nicer photo. But it's always really difficult, and filming is one of those things that technically I'm not the best at, even though I work with a media producer at work, so I probably should be. But anyway, please excuse the setup. I'm still, as I mentioned many times, trying to figure out the best place, the best setup, all of these things, but I'm sure it'll be fine even if you are mainly able to listen, because everything will turn out of focus, I'm sure, because I've changed the setup. Enough rambling. I hope you're all well. I am trying to film just as November ends, so that I don't fall into all of the rush of Christmas content. Don't expect anything from me. I tried a few vlogs last year that you are welcome to watch if you're curious, where I showed a bit more of my house here in Scotland. I showed more of a much younger Fela. I showed Denmark. I went home to visit family. So I tried a bit of that, but I'm just going to be honest and say that I don't think that type of content is something I find particularly inspiring to make. As much as I enjoy watching it, it just feels a little bit I just don't feel very genuine making it. And it's interesting because obviously my friend Laura from Penrose Knits makes some beautiful vlogs, and every time I watch them I think, oh yes, maybe I should do something of that. But when I try, I just don't think it is content that I naturally know how to make, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to sit out on most of the sort of like Christmas content, but I might make some in between Christmas and New Year's, because I'm not going back to Denmark over Christmas, so I'll have a bit of extra time basically. So I am planning to make another one, what I knit in 2023, which always seems to be a really popular video. I've made 2, I think, so far. So yes, I will stop rambling and get started with what we're talking about today. So the first thing is my sort of finished object, and it's the thing that I'm wearing, which is my Kerr sweater, which is designed by my lovely friend Rebecca, who I test knitted this for. She's also known as the Career Bear. So yes, this is my Kerr sweater. I will pop in the cutaway now, potentially slightly worse light because I'll film that after I film this. But yes, this was a test knit for Rebecca. I knit this in a size 5, using one strand of the sort of the woolly knit net wool, which you can see here, which is like this creamy base with like slight speckles of especially sort of like black and grey speckles, and my contrast colour is Isa Alpaca 1 and 2 held together, which in retrospect I think I should have gone for 2 strand of Isa Alpaca 2, which is sort of the fingering weight one, because double strand of woolly knit, which is what I've used as the British wool, is I think quite thick when held together, even for sort of a DK gauge, especially when, like me, you're mainly used to working with like a fingering and lace weight to achieve DK. So I feel like this has ended up, the gauge of the colour work has ended up a bit funky, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. So I think if I could do it over, I think I would have used double strands of the Alpaca 2 to sort of match the thickness of my main colour. That was the contrast colour is leftover yarn from my office sweater that I knit in around May 2021, because I knit it when we'd first moved into this house. I was finishing it up. So it has been in my stash for a long time, and it's quite a nice yarn, this like dark grey. So I kind of like how you create slightly lower contrast. So yes, that's the colours I've used. The sort of knitting of this I think is quite good in the sense that it's a traditional, at least to me, construction of a drop shoulder. So like you start with a back panel, you pick up for one side of the front, you pick up for the other side, and you join those, and all while on both front and back you work shaping for the armhole, and then you join completely in around, and that's when the colour work starts, which is nice. So you're not doing any wrong side colour work, which I think is more difficult. So so then you start the colourwork panel, and then it's like once the colourwork panel is done, you just have you know, basically the rest of the body to do. But it's quite nice because I find that, you know, for these drop shoulder sweaters, which by now I've knit a few of, that the top feels quite engaging, but still mindless, because while you're working some shaping, it's mainly, you know, knitting stockinette stitch flat, which is quite easy, and then you move on to the colour work, so that's a bit of change in pace, and then you just have the body to finish, which is a nice break before, you know, you pick up for your sleeves, and then you have the colour work panel on the sleeves as well, and then it's quite a traditionally worked sleeve, I would say. So you do have some decreases, and then you have the cuff itself. I made a few modifications. Well, I only really made I made changes to the length. So usually when I test knit, I almost always test knit completely to pattern. So that also means that unless I have explicitly asked, I will knit, you know, the sleeve and body length as described in the pattern. But for this, I could tell when I'd finished the colour work and tried it on that I thought the colour work would turn out quite tight. So I knew I had to block quite aggressively sideways, so I knew I wanted extra length. So as it got blocked, it wouldn't turn out shorter. So I think the intended like length of this sweater is that it is slightly cropped. I know Rebecca is much more of a slightly cropped person. And also, having met Rebecca in person, we do have a slight height difference. So I'm sure what would be cropped on me would still be a little bit longer. But the joy of knitting top down is obviously it's so easy to adjust lengths. You can just try it on. So that's what I did. I feel like I'm always bad for, even if I try it on, I always like, I still think it's done like way before it actually is done. So yeah, I tried it on and then made sure to add like a few more centimeters than I thought I needed. For the sleeves, I again, I know Rebecca's preference is often like bracelet length, or like just to like the start of the wrist. Now, if I hold it like this, this is obviously the shortest the sleeve will ever be when you hold your hand like this, and you can see that's when it's just past my wrist bone. But sort of day-to-day wear, my favourite is actually this kind of length, so sort of halfway down the arm. I like quite long sleeves, especially because I find with wear they often get shorter, and I don't know if it's a slight complex. I am about 170 centimetres tall, probably a little bit more, and I'm about 5'7" if you work in British units, and so I wouldn't say I'm like very, very tall, but I'm also not that short, if that makes sense. So especially when I moved to Britain, British people are shorter. Truly they are shorter. The average height is shorter here. So for me, it I think I have like a bit of like a complex with things looking short. So like if things are unintentionally cropped for both like the sleeve and body length, I just feel really awkward, and it's something I really struggle with commercial clothes. I just seem to have very long arms. Like for things to fit well on my arms, I need extra length. So what I did for these sleeves to add extra length is that I added one more round of like the decrease round on the sleeve itself in stockinette, and then when it came time to do the ribbing, I basically just calculated how many decreases I needed to have a stitch count divisible by 4 so that I could do the double ribbing, because I'd done, you know, the extra decreases. So really not a major change, but I guess centimetre wise it was probably quite a few centimetres. What else did I change? So I also, Rebecca recommends either just like a traditional bind off, I don't know what that's called, you know, where you like you pulled a stitch over the previous stitch, but I did a I used a technique that I had seen on Easy As Knits Instagram, which essentially what you do is that you take a very long tail and you thread it through a needle, and then you pull it through 3 stitches on the needle, as if to purl. Yes, as if to purl. And then you take the outermost stitch and you drop that off the needle, and then you take the long thread through 3 stitches and take the other stitch, just drop it off, take it through 3, take the other stitch, drop it up, pull it through 3, that kind of pattern. And I will show you up close, and it kind of creates, especially after blocking, I feel like before blocking it didn't, but now after blocking I think it creates kind of like a low faff like Italian bind off, like it's a bit more invisible than a traditional bind off, but without having to do the actual Italian bind off, especially because in 2x2 ribbing I've been told is a major faff, and as much as I love Italian, I was like, I'm not going to put myself through that. That does create a nice, as you can tell, quite a nice stretchy edge, which is good because I kind of knew that when these sleeves were first knitted the ribbing was quite tight, but it has slowly relaxed, and I kind of wanted ribbing that could sort of accommodate that. It probably flares a little bit, as you can tell, but I don't think when wearing it's particularly noticeable. So I also managed to not knit down my neckband straight, so at some point I'm gonna have to fix the neckband so that it's straight. I don't think it's too visible when wearing, and I was so lucky to join Rebecca for the photo shoot she had planned, and I kind of wish that I had noticed it before, so I could have fixed it before the photo shoot. It's so unlike me. I usually always knit it down straight, so I'm not completely sure what has happened. But anyway, probably will need fixed. Now my biggest problem is that I must have completely screwed up gauge somehow. I think a size 5 was always going to be a tight fit, or not tight fit, but like less positive ease than maybe recommended. But I had tried Rebecca's size 5 at the Perth Yarn Festival, which is why I decided to knit this, and she also used a woolly knit British wool, and I have gauge swatched, I promised. And I also went up a needle, like I think I went up 0.25, and I think I should have gone up more for my colour work to keep it more loose. But I just think had I gone up, like I should probably have knit at least a size 6, maybe a 7. But I think if I'd gone up that far, then I feel like I would have had a much better fit, and it would have been a lot more forgiving for like the tight gauge that I ended up having. Sorry, I ended up on neighbourhood watch as my neighbours talk together, because again, when I tried it on, it just sits, the colour work just sits quite tight around my bust. Now by blocking, I have managed to stretch it enough that I can wear it without squashing my chest, but I don't think the fit is perfect. So yeah, definitely messed up on that one, and I kind of wish that I had gone up a needle size and fixed it earlier. I ended up being on a little bit more of a tight deadline than I kind of had planned to, because I ended up starting this and then actually test knitting sweater number 23 in between going back to this, so I ended up being a little bit tighter than I may have wanted. I will say that I used most of the cone, so this is all I have left. I can't remember how many grams it is, but as you can tell, it's not a full, it's less than 50 grams I think. So I would have not managed to get a full sweater out of that cone, but it is quite satisfying that this is what I have left of one of those very big British woolly knit cones. All of that said, I feel terrible for saying this, but I have been really drawn to wearing it, which I think is a great sign. Like, I think for me it's like a neutral being, this kind of creamy with grey colour work, but at the same, like, I'm really drawn to wearing it, but at the same time I think the fit is just not perfect, and I could definitely see myself knitting it again. I think the colour work is quite perfect if you're not the most, like, the best colour work knitter, because if you don't want to catch float, you could probably actually not. But if you do, there's very few rounds where it's truly necessary. So I do think it's quite a good, like, you know, not the most experienced colourwork knitter kind of thing. But because it is a little bit on the smaller side, and I keep adding knitwear to my collection without getting rid of any, I have actually wondered, I have a family member whom I think it's just that bit smaller than me, that on her it would fit really well. It's my auntie, and I have wondered if I should offer it to her. With it being quite rustic yarn, I don't know if she'd like it, so I'll wait and see and kind of sit on it. And it kind of makes me sad because I love the photos we had taken and I think the fit is good. I just feel like it doesn't really do the sweater justice, because in that kind of severe block, this colour work has ended up a lot shorter than it's meant to be. So I am officially probably the worst tester ever. I'm glad that Rebecca probably hopefully won't hold a grudge because we're also friends, but yeah, I'm a terrible tester. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about just now, but I'll wait and see, probably wear it a little bit just because it is really easy to wear. Now, when I first felt the British wool, I think we need to, you know, get settled in for a bit of a off-topic talk about sort of yarn softness and itchiness. So I have filmed podcasts. I started filming podcasts I think when I knitted about 6 months. So you can go all the way back, and when I first started knitting, like very first started, I was quite wool sensitive. So obviously most of the wool I'd ever touched was like, you know, a commercial sweater with like 10% wool content, the rest acrylic type sweaters. And I, you know, from those sweaters there was very few that were next to skin soft for me. And so when I first started knitting, I was very conscious that yarn could be itchy. And so I quite quickly started seeking sweaters that were soft, seeking yarn that was soft, and kind of using that to select whatever quality or whatever yarn quality, like, you know, whatever yarn I used. So if you go back, so my first like full year of knitting, you can see what I started out with. So I knit a wool and a gang in their wool, Crazy Sexy Wool, is that what it's called, which I'm not crazy about, around for another day. But my second sweater was knit in Camel Wool's Sniff Nook and Isaiah Silk Mohair, and still two of my favourite yarns. I haven't knit in Isaiah Silk Mohair for quite a long time because it's quite expensive, to be perfectly honest, which is why. But anyway, I knit in that and I loved it, and Sniff Nook is still, I think, one of the softest yarns I've ever worked with. But that kind of gave me this confidence that, you know, if I could live with Isaiah Silk Mohair, you know, everyone always said that like drop silk mohair was just the same. And I was like, how much difference can there really be when the composition is different? And the answer is it can be very different. I have another video where I speak about mohair and its alternatives, but I quite quickly discovered that as much as I didn't mind Isaiah Silk Mohair, it definitely, all mohairs aren't created equal, and that things could still be itchy. And then I feel like I went through a phase where I definitely had sweaters that I couldn't stand wearing next to skin, and like it would just be prickly and itchy and all of this. And I think what has really changed over time is that I personally don't think I'm that sensitive anymore. And I think, first of all, the thing about itchiness, and my mum is like basically allergic to wool. I think of everything I've ever made, even my softest like merino cashmere blends, there's been like one yarn like that has wool in it that she's touched and didn't find itchy. Some of it also comes down, I feel like it's the wrong word to use, but I'm essentially going to call it hysteria. So it's like once something goes itchy, all you feel is itchy, and then it goes itchier and itchier. It's doing it as I'm talking about it right now. I'm sure all of you in it is itching as well. And I think something that I had to relearn, when you've mainly worn acrylic sweaters, you're obviously used to wearing essentially plastic on your body, and plastic, you know, isn't necessarily itchy, but it's not very breathable, and the feeling on your skin I think is quite different. And so something I had to learn to appreciate more woolly wools was that woolly wools gives off heat in a different way, right? Like a very woolly sweaters are some of my thicker sweaters. When I wear them, it is almost like sometimes having a hot water bottle on. It's that kind of insulating warm feeling. But I find in contrast to acrylic, you don't get that kind of like sweaty feeling, like you just don't sweat in wool the same way. And it was once I kind of got used to that kind of prickly warm feeling that wool can give, that all of a sudden I became much more tolerant towards other wools. So I'm sure many people will ask, well, how soft is the woolly knit British wool? Because it is really price competitive. Like, considering you could knit, you know, I know this one is a drop shoulder and should be more oversized, but based on the fit of this, I could, using one coin, realistically knit a full size, not cropped sweater in my size, which is XL to 2XL, depending on how they do their grading and sizing, etc. So, you know, it is really affordable, because I think the coin's not on offer. Are they £22 now? I can't remember. They're definitely less than £30, I think. So it's really price competitive, and again, I know wool can be prohibitively expensive if you knit a lot. But the answer is, I personally do not find it itchy. I'm wearing a t-shirt underneath. My most sensitive areas actually mainly here on my chest, and then it's my shoulders. That's where I almost always have eczema, and I find it's my eczema that responds to wool the most. And so with this, I would be more inclined to wear just like a normal crew neck t-shirt. I think I have worn it without it and been fine, but again, that's what I tend to wear. And also I find if I'm very, very freshly showered, my skin is also more sensitive, so I'd definitely go for a t-shirt then. But here on my neck, as we're talking about it, it's always itchy, you know, that's just how it works. But day to day, I do not notice it, and I do not find it particularly uncomfortable. But I will say, I do not think this British wool is for someone who doesn't appreciate woolly wools. It is rustic, and I have grown to like rustic, which I would have thought was impossible when I first started knitting. But I have. But again, I just don't think it'd be for everyone. So that is something to keep in mind if you're wanting to knit with it. I will say, I've shown you before, but I did start another project where I held it with silk mohair. I think held with silk mohair or similar, you know, like fluffy yarn. I think most people would find it a lot more bearable. I do think, feeling wise, woolly knit the British wool reminds me a bit of Sandnes Peer Gynt, and I find it feels slightly softer than the Helhold Ullspinnery. That's hard to say when you've been speaking English. Helhold Ullspinnery. Their yarns are slightly more rustic, I think, ever so slightly. So on the rustic scale, it's definitely not as rustic as it comes in. Like, it's not like Frittersgarn from Sandnes or something like that, but it's definitely not as soft as like a knitting fold of merino, for example. So yeah, I don't think this yarn would be for everyone, but I would definitely recommend you give it a go. And the 200-gram hanks actually still have quite a good yardage, like you'd still be able to get slip over or something out of that, and you could then try and feel it in real life and see how you feel about it, because I was not convinced when I first received it that it'd be next to skin soft to me, but so far so good. And I do think it'll wear sort of well. I do have a little bit of pilling. I also have loads of my own hair on there, so I do notice a bit of pilling, but considering I don't have my hair in it, it should be fairly easy to just use a wool comb on every once in a while. And I also think the more it will peel, the more it will create like a resilient fabric. So that's everything about my Kerr sweater. It is released now, so I will link it down below if you are wanting to buy the pattern. It gets my absolute warmest recommendations. It was a very nice knit. Even when I was rushing at the tail end, I actually still very much enjoyed knitting it, so that is big praise. Right, so that's that. I am just going to show you a very, very quick what I am doing with some of the leftovers, because I still have just under 50 grams of the alpaca 2, which I don't know what's going to become, maybe a baby knit for my friend. I don't know, but if you do have any suggestions for like the sort of single balls of fingering weight, I'd love to hear it. But obviously I had to join in the crease, so I'm just going to grab it because it will rattle. If you have been anywhere on different knitting podcasts recently, you will know the absolute craze that is penny gloves. I knit a pair of penny gloves sort of the tail end, like the very start of spring last year, I think, or yeah, like here this year. And I have worn those penny gloves so much. They are probably one of my most worn knitwear pieces. I find the penny gloves are brilliant for driving, and I actually find they're quite convenient with the dog because they're easy to get on and off, and I kind of like that they are sort of fab free. So the essence of penny gloves is essentially just that you have a row of, like, you have a bit of purling just when you begin, so no ribbing, and then it's just basically stockinette, and that's it. So they are a nice mindless project. Oh, I think I have fluff under my nose, apologies. Could also be a feeler hair, to be fair. She's been very quiet, hasn't she? So well behaved. But yes, I'm using the alpaca one for this, so that's like a lace weight, because I had quite a lot left. You can see that here. So I pulled it from the middle because I needed 2 strands, and it's created a bit of a yarn bath that I sorted out the other day, so it should be all right. But yeah, it doesn't look that pretty just now. But I decided to use it for the penny gloves because it is one of the recommended yarns, and it just means I can get some of it out of stash. This might also be a present. I might end up keeping them because I think this dark grey will be a really practical choice, and it is really, really nice and fluffy, I think. So I'm going to show you those hopefully when they're finished. I'm not going to show you them if they're not finished next time because they are not particularly interesting to look at. And my absolute main knit has actually made me write down notes on paper, which is so not like me. The dog has now fully stretched her back legs and she's lying like a chicken, all stretched out. She's this long. She's, well, I know because this is a king size. I think it's, is that 140? Is it 160? I can't actually remember. She's a big doggo. But my main sort of knit has been, if I just take out these 2 yarns, which I put away, my main knitting that I have been working on after finishing the Kerr sweater is my final test knit of the year. If you watched the last episode, the yarn for this, which was kindly sponsored by Udling, arrived right in the middle of the episode, which was amazing. And this is how much I have. So I'm going to hold it up so you can appreciate the texture. So I think the English term, I have been calling it pleats. I don't think it's called pleats. I think it's called plissés. I presume. I think it's a French word and that's what they're called in Danish, but it sounds French to me, so I presume it's the same in English. But that's what this basically, this kind of structure is. It is knitted, as you can tell, bottom up. So this is actually the base of the body and it looks massive, doesn't it? I have checked my gauge and I seem to be sort of on gauge. But it just looks massive, doesn't it? I think it does have quite a lot of positive ease though. So this is the Sharpie sweater from the Creadia. Yeah, I always want to see, because it's called the Creadia, I always want to say the, but it's not. She's called Creadia Studio. I will of course link her down below. But yeah, so that's she's the designer of this and she contacted me to ask if I'd test knit this for her. I did not realise, I think when I said yes, just how much work this was going to be. The structure isn't, I don't think difficult is the right word. The thing is, what you do is that you essentially do 1 row of ribbing, so like knit 1, purl 1, and then you do a few rounds of stockinette stitch, and then on a certain round what you essentially do is that the round you did the ribbing, it kind of creates these quite neat knit and purl stitches separated, and essentially on the wrong side you can use a needle or you can pick it up as you knit it, but you pick up a leg of all of the knit stitches, and then on the plissé making round you knit together 1 knit stitch with that a picked up stitch, and then you just knit 1. So essentially you're knitting down every other stitch, and as you can kind of see, this is what I'm probably just going to double check I don't slide all the work up my needles. You kind of create this kind of structure on the inside. So that means that when you knit it down to create this kind of obviously like condensed fabric, You can see it doesn't have very much stretch, for example, besides sideways. When you do that, you obviously lose some of the length, right? Because you are kind of squishing them together to create the sort of pleat. And I think I underestimated how long that structure takes, because essentially I think you're about halving the length of like those rows every time you do a pleat. So actually the knitting of this has been a lot more than it maybe looks like. And then when I very first began, you wouldn't think that, you know, knitting two together, knit one would turn out to be particularly complex compared to some of the other things I've knitted. I just kept making mistakes, and I think the problem I discovered was that I was so desperate to speed up the process because I was so conscious of getting it finished. I was making more mistakes. And then knitting, you can basically only knit, you can only tink, right? You can only go backwards, like tink, knit backwards in it. And that just took forever. And sometimes it was finding where you'd made the mistake, and before you'd rectified it, you know, this is a big body, like this is on 5mm needles, or US 8. Yes. But like before you find that mistake, it can, you know, there's a lot of stitches on here anyway, even though it feels like quite a tight, quite a big gauge. As you can tell, I don't actually think the yarn, which I'll talk about in a minute, creates a particularly like a thick strand. So anyway, it just takes a long time, especially like, I think it's, you are in the double digits, or triple digits, I should say, for picking up the stitches when you're knitting two together. So yeah, it just, yeah, it's just a lot of work. And I just don't think I had fully appreciated that's what I'd said yes to. And now I am not all that used to knitting like bottom up anymore. I think I've done it a few times, but it's not my usual. So I'm also trying to get used to that. And what I'm trying to remind myself is that the body always feels the longest. So I am two pleats, hopefully, away from where you split the front and back, and then you obviously finish knitting the front and back and connect those together. And then for this, you also knit the sleeves bottom up, and then they are sewn on at the tail end. But I'm hoping, based on the amount of pleats that it's actually need for the front and back, that the body was really the big piece of work. So that's what I'm going to keep telling myself. The deadline for this, I think, is the 18th of December, which I am honestly at the moment not completely sure I can reach, just because there is still quite a lot of knitting to go. But Nabita seems really, really lovely, and I'm sure if I told her that I'm trying my hardest, but I might be a little bit behind, I don't think I'm the only one. Because it is a lot of knitting, and I think it'll be lovely now it's done. Like, I feel like after I kind of just accepted that I needed to slow down and not rush the knitting, it became so much easier, and I made so many less mistakes, and it's made me a lot less frustrated to not have as many mistakes. I kind of feel like I learnt my lesson that first of all slowing down was important, and then it was like checking frequently if things looked right. So like if the stitches, it's quite easy to, you know, to knit two together in a row so you get kind of a slanted one or whatever. So I found the most important thing is actually just to stop every like 10-15 stitches and fully check that things look right, because it's much quicker to knit back, you know, 10 stitches to knit down, like to knit back 50. So that is basically all I will be knitting on for the foreseeable future. And I think once that's done, I am ready for break. I almost signed up to Rebecca's Tawny test knit because I really like the look of it. And I was like, oh, the deadline isn't until like, I think it's end of January. I was like, I'd be fine, I could totally do that. And then I was like, I probably could, but I'm just going to fall into the same trap, which is that having these 3 deadlines so close to each other is plenty. I think a little break would be very, very nice, just to knit on things that I feel the pull off, because sometimes the frustration, because I don't think the deadline for this was actually that tight originally. I was just unlucky that that the yarn is sponsored from Inling, and at the time Inling hadn't yet added shipping to the UK. So when all the Danish testers ordered their yarn from Inling, I wasn't able to just yet because it wasn't added. And then once they did, it just takes a long time to send to the UK, to be honest. So that just put me a few weeks behind, but then I had to finish the Kerr sweater anyway. But you know, you easily lose then, you know, 3 or 4 weeks of knitting, and I could definitely feel that, because I already had lost a few weeks of knitting on this because I had sweater number 23. So I am forcing myself to be a bit more sensible and slowing down a little bit on overcommitting myself, because it's easy to get frustrated if you don't feel like you're making progress. And then especially for test knits, it's easy to compare yourself to someone else who has managed to make so much more progress than you. You know, by the time I fully got back into the Kerr sweater, like I swear several people had finished their sweaters already. So that's the plan. The yarn for this, I love the colour. So this is, I basically hold 2 strands of this with a strand of mohair. So this is Unling's Everyday Wool, which I think is number 12. I will link it all down below together with the colour. This is in, I don't know what solbær is in English. It's in Danish. The name for these is solbær. I think the English is berry sorbet. I think that's the English name. And it's a wool cotton blend. I can't remember the exact composition. I am almost done with my first 2 coins, which if I hold this up again, I think that is a lot knitting I've gotten out of those coins. So I'm almost done, and I have for days been thinking that today is the day I get to crack into a new coin, but it hasn't happened yet. A good way to, really managed to get fluff in my eye here. I always find a good way to sort of gauge how much knitting you have is always by meterage, right? So for this I was sent, or asked to order, I should say, 6 coins. So if I go by that, I'm about a third of the way through, but based on how much of the body I've gotten done, I reckon I'll need less than that, to be honest, especially because I'm doing less knitting for the top of the sweater. Like, you're doing less of the pleats, whatever. And I always find that sleeves are quicker. I don't know why, but I always find sleeves much easier than a body. So I don't think I'll go through all of it. I also got, as I said, ordered, I also got sponsored mohair from them, which is number 10. And it is a 70% super kid silk and 30% silk. And I can't remember the colour of this. I think it's called wine, something like that. And it is probably, I don't know if I can really show it, but I totally think this is the fluffiest we have ever worked with. Like, it is, like, if you look here, like, all of that is pure fluff. Like, that is literally just fluff. It is undoubtedly the fluffiest I have ever worked with. Price wise, the Everyday Wool isn't too expensive. Obviously, with the quantities you need, it does add up. But I think one of their coins run, I think it's like 600 meters. So, you know, like, I would usually go for 1200 meters for a sweater my size. So with 4 coins, you could realistically hold it double strand. It does feel quite thin. I'm not sure I can compare it to alpaca wools to see. Yeah, it seems ever so slightly thinner than alpaca 2, which is fingering weight, but then alpaca 2 has quite that kind of twist where when you pull the yarn, you know, it goes thinner. So yes, and the mohair price wise, I think it's about a tenner. So it's definitely more in the sort of Isère, knitting for Olive, like top, you know, top of your budget, or like most expensive mohairs, but it is beautifully fluffy. I will say, one thing that I have found is that it is the balls itself, like the mohair balls, are incredibly loosely spun. You can almost see it by the fact that this, you know, the bed, like the belly band won't stay in the ball. But I have found that a little bit frustrating because it does give it a tendency that you essentially get big chunks of the mohair coming off at one time when you pull it, and then you end up with a mess because it's so incredibly fluffy that it sticks to itself and then it tangles. So I did have one ball. So usually I always carry like a spare set of yarns with me. So just one. I usually don't take all of it. You know, just if I'm like, you know, I keep that up here in this room, and then if I'm downstairs I don't have to go up and grab it if I need a new yarn. So I'd done that, and the second ball of my hair just like had exploded and tangled extremely badly, and I managed to untangle most of it, and then I used some of it, and then I left like a tail end in case I run out of my hair, which I don't think I will because I got sponsored 12 balls, and I would say usually for a sweater my size I'd be surprised if you need more than 7. So, you know, it does need extra yarn because of the texture, but still I don't think you'll need 12 balls, but we'll see. But yeah, it did just completely tangle itself. So I've just found all in all that for this particular project I'm not knitting and having yarn in the bag at the same time, just because I'm finding that it just tangles. And to be honest, even this has a tendency to tangle, especially with the mohair, because the fluffier the mohair, the more toothy, or like the more it kind of sticks together. It is quite practical in the sense that even when you like drop a stitch, it doesn't seem to run in this yarn. It just does not seem capable of running. Sometimes even tinking backwards, you know, can be hard because the different qualities have stuck together. So I think that is good, and I am excited for it to be done. It is so the sort of like ribbing and stockinette rounds are fairly mindless, but I am finding that the knit two together round isn't, and that's also why I casted on the penny gloves, because it kind of just, I just kind of need something that, you know, sometimes I do have moments where I can't focus on that. So yeah, that's why I casted that on, and I'm really excited to show a little bit of progress on my final whip of today, which I haven't actually given that much focus. It is sweater number 18, so this is all I have, and as soon as the Sharpie sweater's done, this is what's going to get my attention. And that is all I wanted to show. I don't actually have any acquisitions, I think, because I have not been buying yarn or anything else really. Obviously, as we come up to Christmas, I'm sure it's the same for everyone, but I always find Christmas so expensive, like buying presents for everyone, and obviously you spend more money on food and all of those things. So I always sort of like to cut back in December, or around December. So that's the thing. I say this, and yet I'm obviously filming on a new phone, so not the best saver. So there's no acquisitions today, and I feel like I'm just going to do a little bit of chitty chat here at the end if you want to have it on in background, but if you also want to like to looking at projects, I will see you soon. So yes, I think I keep coming more and more around to the idea that 2023 would really be about loving my stash and working through more of that, doing more stash busting projects alongside some bigger projects. I think I'm going to try to get through especially some of my heavier like worsted weight and up yarn, and because that takes up the most room, and I don't feel guilty about having like a lot of like knitwear, because I do use most of my knitwear, but I'm just getting distracted because this guy across the road is washing windows, and he has this like broom looking thing that just has water squirting out of it, and he stood in one garden and like managed to wash the windows in the house across through the garden, which is quite impressive. But yeah, so I think that's my plan for 2023, really just enjoying that. And I also think that I can put more money away, and then when I start running out of projects, then I can start to justify spending a lot of money on really nice yarn, which is obviously a massive privilege. I won't deny that if my favourite things knit might ask me for another test knit, that I will say no. She did ask me to test knit the Vivica cardigan that she just released, but as you can tell, my needles are not free to take on like a half brioche test knit, so I didn't do that. In my personal life, I feel like times have been good. Fela is, as she's always been, at times an absolute menace, who can drive me slightly bananas, but vast majority of the time she is just the best thing ever to get me out of the house. So yeah, life in that sense has been good. I haven't been very good at sleeping, but that's always what kind of comes to me in winter time, so I'm hoping I can improve that slightly. And that's it. That's all I wanted to talk to you about. I hope to see you all after Christmas, and I hope you have a wonderful Christmas if I don't get the chance to see you before then. I know Christmas can be hard for some people. It definitely can be for me, because not seeing my family and all of these things are always sometimes a bit difficult, but I know that Christmas can seem like this joyful time that we all have to love, but it's not always like that. So if you are struggling because it's Christmas, I feel for you. If you don't celebrate Christmas, then obviously that's fine too. But yes, Merry Christmas everyone, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye!